Good afternoon, students. We are now in week 6. So congratulations on making it halfway through the class. And so this week in week 6, you just have 2 things to do. You have your week 6 forum where you're going to discuss revision techniques. And then you have your week 6 final draft that's due. And the final draft will count as your midterm grade. So welcome Kiki to this class. So I was just telling everyone that you have 2 things to do for your week 6. For week 6, you have your week 6 forum, revision techniques, and then you have to work on your week 6 final draft, which counts as your midterm grade. So that's the 2 things you have to do for week 6. And then after you finish week 6, you will be halfway done with this class. And so far I'm pleased with the progress that everybody has been doing on all of their writing. So how are you doing in this class so far? You're muted.
I'm doing okay. I can do better.
Yeah, everybody thinks they can always do better because we're all works in progress, aren't we? We all want to learn and grow. That's how we do better. So yes. I'm going to, do you have any questions about the class? Or you want to wait until after the lecture?
You can wait till after the lecture.
Okay, so let's go into the lecture without any more ado. So here we go. Okay, the week 6 lecture will cover week 6 forum, revision techniques, week 7 forum, what is a comparison contrast essay, week 7 quiz, grammar concepts, and the week 7 a practice quiz. So that in the week 6 forum, we will be discussing revision techniques. So far, the most popular revision technique is the print and read aloud technique. But there are other techniques you can use for revision of your paper. So revision means that you're checking for the whole essay structure. So there are 2 steps to looking over your paper. First, you want to make sure that your essay structure is sound. So that's known as the revision technique. And so within the revision technique, you have the scissor technique. So then the scissor technique, you cut up your paragraphs and color code them for long and short paragraphs. So one color would be for long paragraphs, one color would be for short paragraphs, and in this way, you make sure that each paragraph is the same length as the other paragraph. Second, reverse outlining. In reverse outlining, you transform your 5-paragraph essay back into an outline to make sure that you have an introduction, 3 body paragraphs, and a conclusion. You also make sure you have a thesis statement that matches the topic sentences of your body paragraphs, and you make sure that your thesis statement is the last sentence of the introduction and the first sentence of your conclusion. Zoom way out. In Zoom way out, you look at your entire paper in its entirety. You make sure that all of the subheadings are the same. All the paragraphs are the same length. You also make sure you don't have too many short sentences and too many long sentences. So zoom way out means that you zoom out of your paper to look at the entirety of the paper. Highlight sentences by length. So you color code the short sentences one color, you color code the long sentences another color. So this way you can see how many short sentences you have and how many long sentences you have. If you have too many short sentences in a row, then you know that you need to have more sentence variety. So when you color code it for sentences, you highlight your sentences by length. This way you can have more sentence variety. Eliminating wordiness. Make sure your paper does not have unnecessary words like this paper will discuss, this paper is about, I'm going to explore in this paper, or I'm writing about this paper to talk about. So in your thesis, just state the thesis without these announcement words. Also make sure that you have transition words for better flow between sentences. So that's all about revision, where you look at your essay as a whole for essay structure. Now the very last step in revision is checking for grammar, punctuation, and APA mistakes. And so people have 3 ways of doing this. Either you have someone look over your paper for you. Number 2 would be glossing, where you read the paper backwards. And then number 3, which is the one I like to do, specific focus, where you check for one grammar error at a time. In other words, the first time you look over the paper, you look for all the comma errors. Second time you look over the paper, you check for all the periods, make sure all the periods are there. And each time you just check for one grammar error at a time. That's known as specific focus. And I do that when I grade papers, by the way. And so those are the different ways in which you can revise your essay. And so in your week 6 forum, you could discuss, well, my editing and proofreading techniques, I like specific focus. And then from the revision techniques, I prefer the scissor technique. So choose one technique from revision of what you like to do, and choose one technique from editing. And that will complete your post, your first post for your week 6 forum. Okay, so each post should have one technique from one technique from revision and one technique from editing, and those are the 2 techniques in which you revise your paper. And then is that clear? Is that good?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
The week 7 forum, we're going to start on a second essay. And so when we do the second essay, you cannot reuse the same topic that you used for your first essay. So you got to write a different topic. And so you're going to be writing a comparison contrast essay where you're going to compare two similar things. And so you will compare 2 topics, 2 people, 2 events, 2 movies, 2 books, or 2 places. And then you're going to tell me which one you like better in your thesis statement, and then you're going to back up your preferences in your body paragraphs. For example, I would say Los Angeles is a better place to live than New York because Los Angeles has better beaches, monuments, and food. And then here you would say the beaches, monuments, and food. This is known as the alternate method. And this is very similar to the 5-paragraph essay structure that you learn in Essay 1. Also, in the second essay, you have to have at least 1 APA in-text citation and 1 APA reference citation. And so in week 7 forum, you're going to choose a topic, and then you're going to write your outline, your pre-writing outline of what you're going to write in your paper. So that's week 7 forum. And here are some of the topics: 2 different drinks, 2 different animals, fruits versus vegetables, childhood versus adulthood, friends versus family, reality TV versus sitcoms, being rich versus being, in other words, which one is better? Is childhood better than adulthood, or friends better than family? So you're going to tell me which one you like better, and then in the body paragraphs, you'll say why you like whatever that is better. So in a nutshell, this is going to be, so start thinking about week 7 for your second essay. So that's going to be week 7, because week 7 you have 2 things to do. You have your week 7 forum where you're going to choose a comparison contrast essay. Then you have your week 7 quiz. So that's it for week 7. Is that clear? That's it for week 7. Now we're going to go over, and then here you have another kind. Here's another example. Home-cooked hamburgers are better than fast food burgers because of the price, nutrition, and taste. In other words, home-cooked burgers are cheaper, taste better, and have more nutrition. And then here you have taste better, paragraph 2, cost less, paragraph 3, and then better nutrition, paragraph 4, and then you repeat the thesis statement as the first sentence of the last paragraph. Home-cooked burgers are better than fast food burgers because of the cost, taste, and nutrition. And then you summarize your essay in 5 sentences in your conclusion. And then before your thesis statement, you need to have 5 background sentences and a hook. So that will be your entire comparison contrast essay. And we're going to be doing comparison contrast essay for the second half of the class, just like we did essay 1 for the first half of the class. All right, you got that in your head?
Yes. So you said the thesis is the last sentence of the intro, right?
Yes, correct.
And then the first sentence of the conclusion. So it just repeats itself.
Correct. Correct, yes.
Okay.
You can reword it. You don't have to have it exactly the same. Usually all the textbooks say that, you know, you need to reword it, rephrase it slightly so that it doesn't sound so repetitive. But basically,
Okay.
you would say, because of the better cost, lower cost, better taste, and higher nutrition value, home cooked burgers are better to eat than fast food burgers. For instance, if you wanted to rephrase it. And so in week 8, I will go over different ways in which you can rephrase and do transition words, and different ways in which you can have sentence variety in a comparison contrast essay. So that way we'll learn that in week 8. But in this week, we're just going to learn about the week 7 quiz. We're going to learn about sentence structure. So now that week 6 and 7 forum is clear, I'm going to go over the week 7 quiz for the rest of this talk. Is everything good?
Yes.
Okay, so let's start on, so basically for the week 7 quiz, you're going to be working on sentence structure. So sentences can be joined together by either a coordinating conjunction, subordinating conjunction, or a transition word. All of the following sentences are joined together by different conjunctions. If the conjunction is a subordinating conjunction, then the sentence becomes a dependent clause, and you need another sentence to complete the thought. These are known as complex sentences. If the sentences are joined together by coordinating sentences, then you have a compound sentence. You need to learn the difference between these two kinds of sentences, in other words, compound and complex sentences, to avoid sentence fragments. And so in student essays, I'm always commenting to students, learn sentence structure to avoid sentence fragments. And I've said that 1,000 times. So what kind of sentences are these? John was fat, Mary was thin. John was fat, but Mary was thin. John was fat, yet Mary was thin. Although John was fat, Mary was thin. Mary was thin even though John was fat. John was fat, whereas Mary was thin. John was fat, nevertheless, Mary was thin. John was fat, however, Mary was thin. So what kinds of sentences are these? Are they simple, compound, or complex? So let's try number 1. John was fat. Is that a simple sentence, a compound sentence, or a complex sentence?
Is it simple?
Simple sentence, yes. A simple sentence simply has a subject, verb, object, or subject, verb, adjective. So in this case, you have subject, verb, adjective. Mary was thin, also a simple sentence. But if we want to connect these two sentences with fanboys, for, but, and, nor, but, yet, so, what kind of sentence is this? Is this a compound sentence or a complex sentence?
A compound.
Compound sentence. Yes, anytime you have two independent clauses put together with fanboys is a compound sentence. And every time you have fanboys in a sentence, you have to have a comma before the fanboys. Although John was fat, Mary was thin. Is that a compound sentence or a complex sentence?
Complex.
Complex sentence, yes. Because in a complex sentence, you have a dependent clause, and the word although is a subordinating conjunction that renders John was fat, an independent clause, into a dependent clause. So once you stick that subordinating conjunction to that sentence, then you make it into a sentence fragment, and then you need another independent clause to finish the sentence or finish the thought. So when you have a dependent clause plus an independent clause, that's equal to a complex sentence. And in a complex sentence, although John was fat, Mary was thin. This is how your reader will read it, because then that makes this sentence less important. This fact, the fact that John's fat is not so important, but it's really important that to notice that Mary was thin. Now, if I don't write although, and I decide as a writer I want to use but, then both sentences are equally important, so that the reader will read it as John was fat, but Mary was thin. So that's the difference between a compound and a complex sentence, because you, the writer, will decide how the reader reads the sentences and how you want the reader to either emphasize one fact or another fact. Okay, so if you want both facts to be equal, then we use fanboys and compound sentence. And if one fact is less important than the other fact, then we use a complex sentence. And it's up to you, the writer, to decide which one you want to use, because it depends on the effect you want to have on your paper, so that you, the writer, you have the power to decide how your reader feels. Your reader's going to feel sad or happy or excited. That's all up to the writer. That's the kind of power of the written word. Mary was thin, even though John was fat. Is that a compound sentence or a complex sentence?
That's a complex.
It's a complex sentence. That means that Mary was thin. That's the important sentence, even though John was fat. Now notice the difference in punctuation. If the dependent clause is at the beginning of the sentence, you have a comma. If the dependent clause is at the end of the sentence, you don't have a comma. So that's
Okay. So those are dependent clauses?
Yeah, because it begins with a subordinate. That's why you have to know the difference between the different conjunctions. So that's why I always tell students to Google yourself a list of subordinating conjunctions. Google yourself a list of coordinating conjunctions, and Google yourself a list of transition words. So that way, if you don't know which is which, you could just look it up on your list. Okay, so if the list says it's a subordinating conjunction, then you know you're making yourself a complex sentence where one side is not as important as another. And then if you look at your list and you see a coordinating conjunction, fanboys, you know you're making a sentence that's equally important. And so that's why it's important. And I haven't done the transition words yet. So those are the three lists. You want the transition word list, subordinating conjunction list, coordinating conjunction list. And then you put that side by side until someday you have it memorized, eventually. But in the beginning, you have to keep looking at it. So that way, when you write, you know what kind of sentence you're writing, because each set of sentences has a different set of grammar rules and has a different set of punctuation rules to go with it. And so here, what kind of sentence is John was fat, nevertheless, Mary was thin?
Complex?
No.
No.
No. Transition words are another word.
Transition.
Yeah, nevertheless. See, that's why you got to have the list. How are you going to know, even though it sounds the same as nevertheless, which sounds the same as, to someone who doesn't use these words a lot, they all sound the same. That's why you need the list. You need to have those three lists. Whereas, actually, I forgot that one. Whereas is actually a, let me think. Whereas, yeah, that's a transition word. Okay, so whereas, nevertheless, and however are all transition words, because notice the punctuation. You have a semicolon and then a comma, semicolon and a comma, semicolon and a comma. These are all transition words. However, with a transition word, you could also have a period. I could put a period and a comma, and then you have to capitalize however. And then if you use transition words and it's a compound sentence, then the two facts are equal, just like with it, because it is a compound sentence. And the difference between, but what's the difference between saying John was fat, nevertheless Mary was thin, and let's go back to John was fat, but Mary was thin. They're both compound sentences, and they both have equal facts where you have one that's opposite the other. What's the difference between the two compound sentences?
What was it again? I'm sorry, I was writing.
John was fat, nevertheless Mary was thin. So this is a compound sentence. John was fat, however Mary was thin. This is also a compound sentence. John was fat, but Mary was thin. And John was fat, yet Mary was thin. What's the difference between using a coordinating conjunction like fanboys and using a conjunctive adverb transition word like nevertheless and however? What's the difference in meaning?
Whereas you're putting more attention on to something else instead. It's not, the attention's not on both of them. The attention's on one person.
Very good. Yes, it means that you're putting more emphasis on one over the other, and that's very similar. That's not similar to this. This just means something is less important, and this is more important. So you have something less important, more important. This one is it's still important. This is even more important. Sorry, it's this one. This is important, but even more important. Nothing is less. There's nothing that's less important than the other. It's important, more important. I know it's hard for you to understand that, but it's when you want to emphasize everything. And then when you use a complex sentence, then some things you want to de-emphasize. There's some things that are not important, whereas if you're using transition words, everything is important. And one thing is even more important than the other important thing. So it all depends on the frame of mind of the writer, you see. That the style of writing, if you use a lot of complex sentences or if you use a lot of compound sentences. And everybody is different. This is why learning sentence structure helps you develop a writing style, because then you decide what's important, what's not important, and you decide how the reader reads your sentence. Although most readers don't know the difference between these sentences, so a lot of readers are just going to read it all the same, sadly enough. But you're supposed to know that. I don't think a lot of people do. Anyway, so here is a review. Simple sentence, subject, verb, object, and a simple sentence is always a complete thought. So Jack gets good grades, Jack studies hard, Jack is tall, Mary is short, Steve gambles all the time, and these are all simple sentences. And then in simple sentences you have subject, Steve loses, verb, rarely, adverb, at the casinos, prepositional phrase. And so at the casinos is a prepositional phrase that shows time and place. So anything that shows time and place, like at the table, on the table, under the table, at 5 o'clock, that's all known as a prepositional phrase. So prepositional phrases can come either at the end of the sentence, like I went to school at 5 o'clock. So there the prepositional phrase is at the end of the sentence. Or the prepositional phrase could also come at the beginning of the sentence. I could say at 5 o'clock I went to class. So prepositional phrases can move around in a sentence. At the casinos, Steve rarely loses. This is still a simple sentence because here you have Steve rarely loses at the casinos. And so when you put the prepositional phrase at the beginning of the sentence, you need a comma. If the prepositional phrase is at the end of the sentence, you do not need a comma. So in that way, it's just like the dependent clause. Okay, so that's one way to remember. Mary yes.
So at the casino would just be the place. It would be considered the time. It's just the place.
Yes, or I could say at 5. Or if I gave another example, if I said at 5 o'clock. Let's see. Steve gambles at the casino, or something like that. And you could have Steve gambles at the casino at 5 o'clock. Anyway, like that. And so when you put the prepositional phrase at the beginning of the sentence, you got to put comma. Yeah.
Comma.
And notice how you got all of these red lines. That's from the Grammarly. That means I didn't put in my apostrophe. So that's why Grammarly is great, because notice how the prepositional phrase and so on and so forth. And at 5 o'clock should be better spaced. That was a mistake over there. Then you can have an infinitive phrase. Mary likes to dress up. To dress is an infinitive. And here, the infinitive phrase, when the infinitive phrase comes at the end of the sentence, you do not need to, you don't need to put a comma. But if I put to dress up, Mary likes to wear evening gowns. Likes to wear evening. So an infinitive, likes to dress up in an evening gown. An evening. Okay, let's have a better sentence. All right, so here, to dress up, the infinitive phrase can go either at the end of, or middle, or the end of the sentence, or at the beginning of the sentence. So when the infinitive phrase goes at the beginning of the sentence, you have a comma. To dress up, Mary likes to wear evening gowns. So you notice that when prepositional phrases, dependent clauses, and infinitive phrases are at the beginning of a sentence, those are known as introductory phrases. So introductory phrases at the beginning, introductory phrases or clauses at the beginning of a sentence takes a comma, as well as dependent clauses. Okay, I didn't write that in, but anyway. Up the hill sits an old house. Up the hill is a prepositional phrase, and therefore, you know, you have to put in the comma. And up the hill, sits is the verb, and so up the hill is the prepositional phrase, sits is the verb, and old house is the subject. So this is one of the rare times where the subject comes after the verb. Okay, so that's also on your test. And it has the same exact meaning as the old house sits up the hill. British English is really full of, British people talk like, up the hill sits an old house. But Americans tend to simply say, the old house sits up the hill. That's much more common in American English. Down the street is the police station. I'm not doing a very good British accent, but anyway. Down the street is the prepositional phrase, is the verb, and then the police station is the subject, which has the same exact meaning as the police station is down the street. Subject, verb, object. And so you can thank the British for that sort of thing.
So we don't put a comma in between street and is.
Down the street is the police station. No, you don't need that. Actually, up the hill sits. It's optional. It's only if it's something like this, where you have not when it sits next to a verb, you don't need a comma. It's only when the next word over is some kind of subject. You see that?
Okay. So you.
Yeah, if it's a subject, but if there's a verb and you simply invert the sentence, it's optional. But by the way, that's not on your test. So you just have to be able to know that this is a subject, this is a verb, and this is a prepositional phrase, and then you have to know that it's a simple sentence and it's a complete thought, and it's not a sentence fragment. Sentence fragments always occur is when you put a subordinating conjunction in front of an independent clause. And so here, and I'm done with simple sentences. Is that good? Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, compound sentence are two simple sentences joined by a coordinating conjunction. And the only coordinating conjunctions that occur in English are fanboys, for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. So a compound sentence has fanboys in it. Fanboys are coordinating conjunctions that join two sentences together. A coordinating conjunction joins two simple sentences together to form a compound sentence. So John and Mary ate and slept. This is not a compound sentence. This is a simple sentence with a compound subject and a compound verb. The word compound simply means two. So when I say compound sentence, I mean two independent clauses. But if I say John and Mary, is that two sentences? If I say is John and Mary two complete sentences?
No.
No. John and Mary are two subjects. So therefore, John and Mary is a compound subject, simply means two subjects. Ate and slept simply means two verbs. So John and Mary ate and slept, it's still a simple sentence. Okay, so that you got to watch out for. It's only when the coordinating conjunction joins two sentences, not two nouns or not two verbs, but two sentences together, then it becomes a compound sentence. John ate steak, comma, but Mary ate salad. And then if you want to find other words instead of but all the time, then you would look up transition words of opposition or transition words of contrast or contrastive conjunctive adverbs. They mean the same thing. The grammar book just has different ways of saying the same thing. And John slept in a bed, but Mary slept on the floor. John gets good grades, for he studies hard. John is tall, but Mary is short. And in all of these, you have your comma. It doesn't matter if it's, and you have your comma always before the, not the transition word, before the coordinating conjunction. And here, yet and so, you can find different ways of saying so would be transition words of consequence. different ways of saying and would be transition words of addition. And then here's another example of a simple sentence. Robert likes to eat steak and likes to dance. So here you have a compound predicate. A predicate means you have a subject and an object. Subject and an object. Subject, object, subject. So that's all it is. A subject, verb, then subject, object, subject, object. So that's a simple sentence with a compound predicate. So beware of compound predicates, compound verbs, and compound subjects. That they do not make compound sentences. And here, usually Mr. Smith goes to the park or he goes to the beach to take his walks. This is a compound sentence because fanboys, the O in fanboys stands for or. Where the heck did I put it? There you go. Yeah,
Right.
here,
Yep.
or. So all of these are examples of fanboy and compound sentences. And so, and then another way of, and so these are all called coordinating conjunctions.
So,
Now-
question.
Yes.
So back to the usual. So that's a complex, right? That word, is that a complex?
Usually is an adverb because it's got
Adverb.
ly. It's got adverbs have totally different. So
Oh,
we haven't gotten
okay.
to that yet. So any word that ends in ly is an adverb.
I remember you said that. You did say that a while back, but
Yeah, and an adverb modifies the verb goes. So how often does he go to the park? He usually goes there very often. So usually talks about the frequency of how many times someone goes to the park or to the beach for that matter. So usually, and the thing about adverbs can be at the beginning of the sentence, the middle of the sentence, or even the end of the sentence. You can put adverbs everywhere. Unlike adjectives usually go before the noun, unless it's after a to be verb, like Mary is pretty. That's the only exception where the adjective comes after the noun. Does that make sense? Yeah?
Mhm.
That's review of, I forget, week 3, parts of speech. Yeah. Anyway, getting to your transit. So here, when you Google yourself a transition word list, this is what you're going to get. Okay? This kind of a list. So that different ways of saying and. Instead of saying and, you would say apart from this, moreover, furthermore, also, as well as that, in addition to this. So transition words of addition. Different ways of saying but. You have unlike, nevertheless, on the other hand, in contrast to. And I'm going to go over with examples in week 8. I'll go over this a lot more. Alternatively, and also for your comparison contrast essay, these words will come in very handy. Instead of saying, as an adult, I have to go to work. As a child, I get to play all day. As an adult, I have to take care of my kids. But as a child, my parents took care of me. As an adult, you see how repetitive that kind of gets if you're doing childhood versus adulthood. So here you could say, unlike an adult, childhood is filled with play. Or you could say, childhood, on the other hand, childhood, on the other hand, is filled with play. Adulthood, you've got to have a job, but childhood, on the other hand, you get to play, or whatever, okay? So in contrast to childhood, adulthood is full of work, or whatever. So here are different ways of saying but. And I will have the sample sentences. You could actually, if you want, you could go ahead and watch the week 8. I think I have my week 8 notes. You can even take a look at the week 8 notes ahead of time. I don't remember if I put that stuff up, the notes ahead of time. I don't remember. Anyway, and then of course you have your adverbs of time. So this is the adverbs of time, and that falls with the usually. Secondly, thirdly, finally, previously, usually falls under transition words of, well, there's so many names for it. You've got conjunctive adverbs of consequence. You've got conjunctive adverbs of order, time, sequence, and so on. And there's just so many ways of, anyway, all you need to know is transition words, okay? And also be aware it's known as conjunctive adverbs. That's another way of saying transition words. So all of these are all conjunctive adverbs, just so you know. And they always put together 2 sentences, and it's a complete sentence. Now we're going to get into sentence fragments. So anytime you add a subordinating conjunction to a sentence, it instantly becomes a dependent clause. Because if I were to say, although Jack is smart, is that a complete thought? Does that sound complete to you? No, you're waiting for more. Although Jack is smart, he still flunked his test, or something like that. So when you put, so what are subordinating conjunctions? Subordinating conjunctions render the independent clause into a fragment or into a dependent clause that needs another sentence to finish it. And so other words, other ways of saying dependent clauses are adjective clauses, noun clauses, subordinate clauses, sentence fragments, incomplete thoughts, incomplete sentences, and adverb clauses. And then you have different kinds of adverb clauses. Adverbial clauses of time, adverbial clauses of opposition. These are all adverbial clauses of that's another way of saying transition words. Yeah, your head is swimming, isn't it? So, and so here you have your subordinating conjunction. So you can get this is just a small list. There's so many subordinating conjunctions that you can use. So you can Google yourself subordinating conjunctions. So that's these words. After, although, as long as though, because, before, even though, if, in order to, now that, once, rather than, since, so that, then, that, though, when, whenever, where, whereas, wherever, whether, and while. And so all of these, when you put it in front of a sentence, makes it a fragment. Another way of memorizing your coordinating conjunctions is by memorizing it as awoobies. Awoobies, okay? So by knowing your awoobies, just like you know your fanboys, this will help you avoid sentence fragments. Because every time you see a woobis near a sentence, you know it's going to be a sentence fragment. So AAA stands for after, although, as. So that's AAA. Then the WW stands for when and while. Then the U stands for until. And then the B stands for because and before. And then I stands for if, and then since. So woobis. You can memorize it that way. Even though there's so many more coordinating conjunctions, but that's like a start. That's for the beginners. So if you don't know any coordinating conjunctions, you could start from here and memorize your woobis. And how can you know that a woobis works? A lot of song titles and TV titles and movie titles use a woobis. After the Gold Rush, As the World Turns, Since I Don't Have You, When a Man Loves a Woman. So a woobis makes for great titles, but titles are not complete sentences. Titles are what that is. They are fragments. All song titles, if I say, As the World Turns, or Since I Don't Have You, is that a complete sentence? No. We would say, oh, I love that song, Since I Don't Have You. It's such a great song. You got to go out and buy it. Then it's a complete sentence because I add other stuff to it. And so here you have, although Jack is fat, as soon as the alarm clock rings, as long as I study hard, because Michael Jordan is tall. All of these dependent clauses come at the beginning of the sentence. You have your comma. And then here, same thing here. Everything at the beginning of the sentence, a lot of commas. And then here, when the dependent clause comes at the end of the sentence, no comma. We'll get to the exceptions in the next section. So John goes to bed after he eats dinner, so no comma. And then if I say, where did it go? Oh, after John eats dinner, okay, is this correct or incorrect? How is this sentence wrong?
No, that's incorrect.
Yeah,
because
you got yourself, this is known as a fused sentence. We're going to be studying that later on today, is when you have, right, so you have to put in after John eats dinner, okay. So then you have, and so when you have the dependent clause, and also, if I simply say, before I go to bed, and I take out, I brush my teeth, is that a complete sentence, or is that a sentence fragment?
You said before I go to bed?
Yeah, just
I brush my teeth.
only before I go to bed.
Oh no, that's a sentence fragment.
That's a sentence fragment, yes. So anytime you take away So that means that when you have a complex sentence, you have the simple sentence, complete sentence, plus the dependent clause. And that both of them together in one sentence, that equals complex sentence. Then it's complete. And so here I have another example of not a complete thought. After John eats dinner, and then after John eats dinner, he goes to bed. So that is a complete complex sentence. Now we have our exceptions. Okay, if you have words like who, whom, which, that, then you have a totally different set of rules when it comes to commas. So if a who, whom, whose, which, that sentence comes at the beginning of the sentence, you have 2 commas. If a who, whose, which, that sentence comes at the end of the sentence, you have 1 comma. So that's what I mean by, when you have adjective clauses. Why is that the case? Because an adjective clause modifies the noun that comes before it. It's, in other words, that entire clause. If I say Professor H, who is Chinese, gives a lecture, then the adjective clause, who is Chinese, that modifies my nationality. Therefore, you have 1 comma before who and 1 comma after Chinese. There. So that's also known as an appositive. So Professor H, 2 commas, who is Chinese, comma, and then teaches English or something like that. And then if the who or which or that, comes at the end of the sentence, you have 1 comma. So I love the table, and then comma, which is made of wood. And so here it's a complex sentence, okay? Get this, all of these are complex sentences because you have a dependent clause, which is made of wood, and then you have your independent clause, I love the table. So it's still a complex sentence, which is why I'm teaching you this within the context of complex sentences. For there are 4 kinds of sentences. Yes.
So if you were to ask a question on this, is it a complex sentence or a dependent clause? I would pick complex sentence.
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
And then if I say, okay, let's say I take this out. Where is there a missing comma? That's a quiz question. Is it after the word love, before the word which, or after the word is? So it would be either after the word, well, that's the same thing. It's either before the word which, after the word is, or something like that. So you obviously, the answer would be either after the word table, before the word which. That's how that would be the answer. That would be how they would test you. Also, we use who, whom, whose, which, that, is when you have 2 sentences with the same subject, and you can combine those sentences together. Instead of saying Professor H is Chinese, Professor H teaches English. That's so repetitive. And you said choppy. So then you would say Professor H, who is Chinese, teaches English. That makes your essay sing. In other words, it sounds more elegant and not choppy, choppy, choppy. And also sounds like you're not in 2nd grade. And so here, John is French. John lives in Paris. So if I'm in 2nd grade or 1st grade and I'm a little kid, I write like that. Then when I'm older, so John and John, if it's the same subject, then we can use who. Who is used always with people. So John, who is French, lives in Paris. So notice how you have here, this whole clause, who is French, is an adjective clause because it modifies a noun, John. The entire clause, and that's why you have comma and comma. And another name for the adjective clause is appositive. Just to make your head swim more, you got to know all these extra words so that when they ask you, where's the missing appositive? Or where is the missing adjective clause? Where are the missing commas for the appositive in the sentence? You have to know that this is the appositive. You have to be able to pick out, that's an appositive. Yeah. And also, we use extra commas when you got supplemental information. Is it really that important to know that John is French? If it's not that important, then we put in commas. If it is important to the sentence, we don't need commas. So that's the difference between non-restrictive and restrictive adjective clauses. And so,
Mhm.
so here, and this whole thing is known as a complex sentence. So to repeat, there are three kinds of sentences. Actually, there are four kinds of sentences, but we're only going to go over three kinds of sentences for your quiz. A simple sentence, subject, verb, object. Then you have compound sentence, in which you have an independent clause, which means it's complete thought. Plus you have fanboys with your comma, and then you have another independent clause. So that is a compound sentence. And then a complex sentence is simply a dependent clause plus an independent clause. And then if you want to take apart your dependent clause, that's a subordinating conjunction plus an independent clause. And so in a nutshell, we're just going to go over three kinds of sentences. So the reason why this is in blue is because these are the actual sentences in your quiz. So here, if you aren't going to be able to make it, please call. This is a complete sentence because here you have your dependent clause if you aren't going to make it, and then please call is a interrogative sentence. It's a complete sentence. Okay, so you got a complete sentence plus a dependent clause, and that becomes a complex sentence. And then it takes skill to call in sick to work with a phony excuse. It is the subject. Takes is, well, it's called an it, vague, placer, expletive subject. In other words, it's just a filler, okay, when you use it. And so it is the subject, takes is the verb, skill to call in to work sick with a phony excuse. This whole thing is considered an object, okay? And then with a phony excuse is a prepositional phrase. So all of this, so subject, verb, object, this is a simple sentence. First of all, one must be sure to speak directly to the boss. This is a simple sentence. One is the subject, must be sure is a verb, to speak directly to the boss. That whole thing is an infinitive object. So subject, verb, object, simple sentence. Today I will be making appointments on the phone. This is correct. So today is an adverb clause of, what was it? Well, anyway, it's an adverb clause of time. And then I is the subject. That's why adverbs can go everywhere. You can say today in the beginning, you can put today in the middle, and today at the end. So adverbs go everywhere. Anyway, so subject, will be making is the verb, and then appointments on the phone is the object. Usually anything coming after the verb is an object. So you got subject, verb, object. That's a simple
Because it's
sentence.
the time. Because it's the time, it gets a comma, right?
Yes.
Before the subject.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. But if I put today at the end of the sentence, you
don't need
you
it.
don't need it. Correct. When I was 4, my father taught me how to ride a bike. So here, when I was 4, that is a dependent clause, and then my father taught me how to ride a bike is an independent clause, and then you have a complex sentence. So that's a complex. Now this one is wrong. And we're going to go over misplaced modifiers in a second. At the age of 4, my father taught me to ride a bike. Now this is wrong because did your father teach you to ride a bike when he was 4 years old? When your father was 4 years old?
Yeah.
You didn't even exist when your father was 4 years old. So this sentence makes no sense.
So that's basically saying that
It's a misplaced modifier. Yeah, this is a misplaced modifier mistake. Therefore, the correct way of
okay.
saying is, at the age of 4, I learned to ride a bike. Because when you have this, the age of 4, it has to modify, whatever it's going to modify has to be close to what it's going to modify. And here,
Gotcha.
this subject is missing. Okay, so this is known as a dangling modifier. When the subject is missing, so we're going to go over this in a second. So on the quiz, they're going to ask you, is this a correct sentence? Is this one a correct sentence? And you're going to say no, because it is a dangling modifier. Oh, it's actually going to ask you, is this a dangling modifier or a misplaced modifier? You'll know that by the time I finish all of this. So here's another one. I could tell the room had been dusted, for all the pictures were crooked. This is correct, actually. In this case, for means because. It's so British. Americans do not use for in this way, okay, unless you're being very, very formal. But in Britain, to say, I studied really hard, for Okay, anyway, so here you have, this is a compound sentence, and then here you have two independent clauses joined by a coordinating conjunction for, which means because. And here you have compound sentence, and that's it. So now you get that? I'm going to go over modifiers.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, what are modifiers? Modifiers are words that provides details and descriptions about the subject. John has a blue shirt. Blue is a modifier because modifier modifies the shirt. In other words, the noun shirt. And so a modifier blue provides details and descriptions about the object shirt. So blue is an example of a modifier. So modifiers describe the subject or the object of the sentence. So in this case, it's describing the object. So here you have two kinds of wrong sentences. You've got dangling modifiers and misplaced modifiers. And so in a dangling modifier occurs when a modifier does not logically refer to other words in the sentence. So if I say, visiting the zoo, the birds chirped loudly. So did the birds visit the zoo, grow legs and visit the zoo to look at animals in cages? No. So here you're missing your subject. Who's visiting the zoo? So correct, while I was visiting the zoo, the birds chirped loudly. So dangling modifier means that you have here a modifier, but you don't have anything to modify. So that there you're leaving the reader dangling, basically, because they're going,
So
that's known as a dangling modifier. Yeah.
so that would be a test question of dangling. Basically, you don't have a subject.
Yeah,
or whatever.
basically they'll ask you what kind of, is this a dangling modifier or a misplaced modifier? They're going to ask you, you have to know the difference. I haven't done misplaced modifier, but then you have to know that that's not a misplaced modifier because we didn't change the words around, we're just missing something. So dangling means something missing. Misplaced means you got to change the words around for the sentence to make sense. Here's another, and also because the reason why these are all in a different color is these are actual sentences from your quiz. Walking on the sidewalk, a car raced by. So did your car grow legs and walk on the sidewalk? No, you walked on the sidewalk. So walking on the sidewalk, I saw a car racing by. So therefore we're missing I. We're once again missing the subject. So while working, an earthquake shook the building. So the earthquake has a job and is working in a building?
Right.
No, it's supposed to be while I was working, an earthquake shook the building. So this is a dangling, and of course on your quiz it's going to say what kind of error is in this sentence, and then the answer would be dangling modifier. Having finished the assignment, the TV was turned on. So your TV grew hands and finished an assignment? No. Who turned on the TV? It's missing.
Right.
After I finished the assignment, the TV was turned on, or something like that. So you got to have your I. And so who turned on the TV? Well, the TV certainly didn't turn itself on. In the future, maybe you enter the room, motion detectors. That might be in the future. But anyway, so it's a dangling modifier because it's missing the subject, who finished the assignment. Having arrived late, a written excuse was needed. So did your written excuse grow arms and your piece of paper grow arms and walk across the room and was late for something? Or were you late? So after I arrived late, a written excuse was needed. So here you're missing, or having arrived late, I gave a written excuse to my boss. So here you're missing I. So these are all examples of dangling modifiers, you see. So having arrived late, I got in trouble. Okay, this I was going over something with. So all of these above sentences has to do with a dangling modifier. So now we're going to go to misplaced. So everything good with dangling modifiers?
Yes.
Okay, so misplaced modifier occurs when a modifier is placed incorrectly in the sentence. So all of the sentences below are all misplaced modifiers. The patient was referred to a therapist with severe psychological problems. So are you going to send your child or whatever to a crazy person, a crazy doctor? Because here, the therapist has severe problems. You're going to go to a therapist that's crazy? No. Who's crazy in this sentence? It's obviously it's not the therapist because she's supposed to help you. It's the correct answer is the patient with severe psychological problems was referred to a. So that means that I have to move these words around in order to make, in order for, that's why it's called misplaced modifier. So I gotta move the words so this modifier is not modifying the right noun. So therefore I gotta move the words around for it to make sense. Another example, the new employee will take the front office wearing the brown suit. So your front office is going to wear a brown suit. I think you can do that now on those picture to text to generator art generators, and you're going to have an office wearing a suit. You can actually do that now with those kind of art generators. But does that make sense in a sentence? Does your office wear a brown suit? No. So therefore you have to change, you have to move wearing the brown suit, and you have to say the new employee wearing the brown suit will take the front office. So that this is a not a dangling modifier mistake. This is a misplaced modifier mistake because the modifier is in the wrong place. My uncle just watches one television station. And so here, just is in the wrong place. And so here you want to say, my uncle watches just one television station. And then this is a misplaced modifier. And so what kind of error is this? This is a misplaced modifier. Now I got to put the mistake back for the next student, for next semester, so that the next student can guess what's wrong with that. X, I will be on the phone making appointments today. So is your telephone growing arms and going to make appointments for you today? No. So therefore, I will be making appointments on the phone today. So I have to say, I have to change making appointments and put that. So if I were to go making appointments and I put it here, I will be making appointments today on the phone. Now that's correct, because that's the sentence we were studying up above when I said that this is a subject, this is a verb, these are all objects, subject, verb, object equals a simple sentence. So now I got to put it back to where it was before. Where was it?
I will be on the phone making an appointment.
Yeah, it's not doing it the way I want it to. So something like this. No, that's actually correct. I will be okay on the phone. I will be on the phone. Let's see. I don't even remember what I had before. So now I will be. That's probably not what I had. But anyway, I will be on the phone today making appointments or whatever. Anyway, so that's wrong. So on her way home, Jan found a gold man's watch. And so here, a gold should be Jan found a man's gold watch. So that also needs. The torn student's book, here it should be the student's torn book lay on the desk. So here you got to move it around. I have to rewrite this later. Okay, so the key to correcting misplaced or dangling modifiers, make sure the doer of the action is named, and make sure the modifier is placed near the word it modifies. And so here, and then that's it. Okay, so is this understood? This is actually the hardest part of I think. Students tell me this is the hardest part of this lesson.
Not
that much. Sentence fragments. So sentence fragments are missing parts of the sentence, like a subject, a verb, or a complete thought. See, this is why I like Grammarly. You see, a sentence free. So a sentence fragment is an incomplete sentence. A sentence fragment does not express a complete thought. A dependent clause not attached to an independent clause is a sentence fragment. And so here, broke the glass. Who broke the glass? The subject is missing. The dog broke the glass. So here, that's correct. Here you have subject, the dog, broke is the verb, object, the glass. here is a fragment, Mr. and Mrs. Smith. So what about Mr. and Mrs. Smith? So the predicate, verb, and object is missing. So the correct sentence would be Mr. and Mrs. Smith are old people. So here you have subject, verb, and object. So it's a simple sentence. And so here is what you have on your quiz. So here are some examples of sentence fragments. Not to a coworker or secretary. So that is a fragment because it's not a complete thought. And not sound like a faker. That is also a fragment and not a complete thought. When he is fat is a dependent clause and not a complete thought. Although she sings is a fragment and not a complete thought. And if a person talks to a coworker who doesn't like him or her is also a fragment because it's not a complete thought. So do you understand everything about sentence fragments?
Right.
Okay.
So it's not.
Now I think this is the last thing on your almost second to last thing on your list of things to know. Run-on sentences. So you've got two kinds of run-on sentences. You've got a comma splice and you've got fused sentence. A run-on sentence is two or more sentences written as one. A sentence can contain more than one thought as long as it is punctuated correctly. A run-on sentence occurs when ideas are joined together incorrectly. In other words, when you join two sentences together and you don't have proper punctuation. So if you're missing your period, that's known as a fused sentence. And if you put a comma where it's not supposed to be, that's known as a comma splice. So let's take an example. A comma splice is when you use a comma instead of a period at the end of a sentence. A comma splice occurs when two independent clauses are joined with a comma instead of a conjunction, fanboys. So just add fanboys to fix the comma splice. So if I say John ate dinner, he went to the restaurant, and then I put a comma here instead of a period, that's a comma splice because that's an unnecessary comma. You're supposed to correct, you can correct it many different ways of correcting it. You can either add a comma and a coordinating conjunction. You can put a period and capitalize the word. Or you can combine the two sentences together. See, I got John and John, same subject. So I could say, John who ate dinner, comma and comma, went to the restaurant. So remember that when you have an adjective clause with who, and it's in the beginning of the sentence, you need two commas. So that's its own different. So a fused sentence is when you have two sentences with no period. So in a comma splice, you're putting an unnecessary comma, and then in a fused sentence, you simply forget your periods. And so John ate dinner, he went to the restaurant. So this is known as a fuse, because that means the two sentences are fused together by mistake. Because when you put the period there, that separates the two sentences. But if you don't put a period there, people are going to read it together. And they're not going to, that's the whole purpose of a period, is to put that, complete stop. The reader will stop reading. So John, at least that's what my first and second grade teacher used to teach me. Anyway, teach us. John ate dinner, he went to the restaurant. So that's wrong. And here you have, so that's known as a fused sentence. Then you put an unnecessary comma, that's known as a comma splice. So you're going to have to know on the quiz, is this a fused sentence error or is this a comma splice error? Is this a complete sentence? Is this an incomplete sentence? That sort of thing. So you have to know that difference. So John ate dinner, period. He went to the restaurant. So in order to fix a fused sentence, you put the period there, you capitalize the word. Or you stick in a positive. John who ate dinner went to the restaurant. Or you can either say John who ate dinner went to the restaurant, or John went to the restaurant, ate dinner. Either way, okay? And ESL students cannot tell that this one sounds better than this one. You actually have to tell ESL students, but for a native speaker, you could tell that this second one just doesn't sound right, and the first one sounds better. And then an ESL student will look at you and go, it sounds the same to me. How do you know that? So that's the difference between someone who speaks native English and someone who doesn't. But even a native English speaker has to be taught the difference between a fused sentence and a comma splice. So anyway, here are some examples of comma splice and fused sentences in your quiz. So the can of mushroom soup must have spoiled, comma, it was bulging at the top. What kind of error is this? A comma splice error or a run-on sentence error? It's a comma
comma
splice. So here, correct would be to put I respect my parents. I resent their attempts to choose a career for me. So what kind of error is this? It's a comma splice. Comma splice. The most popular language in the world is Chinese. More than 1 billion people speak it. So this one is what kind of mistake?
A fused sentence.
Fused sentence because you're missing a period. George knew the answer to the last essay question. He didn't have enough time to write his response. And so here it's a fused sentence because here you're supposed to have a period. George knew the answer to the last essay question, period, and then capital he. This is the last thing you have to know. Okay, so which sentence demonstrates a possessive subject? So we use apostrophe S to show ownership. And so the China doll's dress was a sunny yellow. Brian's hat fell off his head. And so the China doll's dress, so the apostrophe S in China doll shows that the dress belongs to the China doll. Jack's hat was a bright red. Susan's shoes were too small for her. And then this is wrong. The coats were hung in the closet. Because when we have an apostrophe S, see, Grammarly tells you the right thing. You're supposed to have no apostrophe, and it's supposed to be C-O-A-T-S, you see. And once I change it to this, Grammarly does that, then it becomes correct. So that's why I tell students you should get the free version of Grammarly. It doesn't help you with your quiz, but it does help you when you write your essay so you don't make this kind of mistake. It's a nice day, and then it's should have an apostrophe. There you have to have an apostrophe because it stands for it is. See how convenient Grammarly is? See, I'm like a walking commercial for Grammarly here. So then you would go like this, and it would be fixed. So we use apostrophe S to show ownership, okay? And so it's a nice day for a walk. He's a handsome man. These are known as contractions. And we try to avoid using contractions in our academic essays because contractions are too conversational, okay? You don't want to write the way you talk. I live in Darren's house. So here you have a possessive subject. This is known as a possessive subject because here you have the subject, verb, object, and here you have a possessive object. So anything that's at the end of the sentence, I live in Darren's house. Do you believe cooking is a woman's work? Or something like that. So this is a possessive object. This is known as a possessive subject. That's it. You got it? Let's see how long you can remember all of this before everything leaks out. The new employee will take the front office wearing the brown suit. What kind of error is in this sentence? A, B, or C?
Misplaced modifier?
Excellent. Which is choose the correct sentence, A, B, or C? Although Grammarly gives it away, but on your quiz you're not going to have those little red things to tell you that they're wrong sentences, you know?
Oh. Yeah, of course. C.
It's C. If you aren't going to make us, these both are missing an apostrophe. You got to fix this, and here Grammarly tells you to fix this. So if you are going to be able to make it, please call. And not sound like a faker. Is that a complete sentence or a fragment?
Fragment.
Which sentence below is correct, A or B?
B.
B. The most popular language in the world is Chinese. More than 1 billion people speak it. Is this a complete sentence or a run-on sentence?
A run-on?
Run-on, yeah.
Run-on.
What's wrong with the sentence?
No apostrophe or period.
No period, yeah. The most popular language in the world is Chinese, period. Then you capitalize it, more than 1 billion people speak it. Which sentence is correct, A or B?
Is it B?
Yes, because you don't want to take your daughter to a contagious doctor. Yes, so A. Number 7. So is this a dangling modifier or my uncle just watches one television station? So what kind of error is in this sentence? Is it dangling modifier or a misplaced modifier?
I want my uncle. Is it a dangling?
No, because you gotta move the
It's a-
word. If you gotta move the word, it becomes misplaced.
Okay.
Yeah, that means it's misplaced, meaning you place it in the wrong place. George knew the
Okay.
answer to the last essay question. He didn't have enough time to write his response. Is this a complete sentence or a run-on?
Hold on. Run on.
It's a run-on because you need to have a period here. Walking on the sidewalk, a car raced by. What kind of error is in this sentence? Is this a dangling?
Dangling.
It's a dangling, yes,
Dangling.
because you
It's
leave
missing.
me dangling. But who walked on this?
Right.
First of all, one must be sure to speak directly to the boss. Is this a complete sentence or a fragment?
Is it a complete
It's a
sentence?
simple sentence. Excellent. While working, an earthquake shook the building. Is this a dangling modifier or a misplaced modifier?
Misplaced.
No. Dangling, because who's walking?
While
I was walking. Yeah, because when
Yeah,
it's something missing, that's dangling because you're leaving the reader dangling. If you got to move it around, that's misplaced. That's how you remember it.
Oh.
If a person talks to a coworker who doesn't like him or her, is that a complete sentence or is that a fragment?
Fragment.
Not to a coworker or secretary, is that a complete sentence or a fragment?
Not to a co-person. Oh goodness. And I want a
It's
fragment.
a fragment because it's missing a subject and an object. Number 14, the can of mushroom soup must have spoiled. It was bulging at the top. Is that a complete sentence or a run-on?
Right.
Yeah, you can tell because the red lines want you to correct it with, I think it wants a period there. Anyway, modifiers are words that, A, B, or C.
Should be. Is it A?
Yes, because modifier like the blue shirt offers details and descriptions about an object. We did this one already, but we could do it again. George knew the answer to the last essay question. He didn't have enough time to write his response. Is this a complete sentence? Yes, it's a run-on. We did that one already. So, does the following sentence contain a misplaced modifier or a dangling modifier? I will be on the phone making appointments today.
And I will be on the phone making appointments today. I will. Okay. If it's misplaced, is it misplaced? So it's
You gotta,
misplaced
yes,
modifier?
misplaced is when you gotta move the words around to make it make
Right.
sense. So that's misplaced, correct. I respect my parents. I resent their attempts to choose a career for me. So is that a complete sentence or a run-on?
Let me see. I respect my parents. I resent their attempt to choose a career for me. I think it's like a complete sentence.
No?
Is it run?
No,
Oh, it's a run.
yeah, because it's got a comma. It's actually a comma splice. So actually, you need to put a period there.
Erie.
So do you feel you're
Okay.
ready to take the test?
I think I'm ready. I ain't too bad.
Yeah, I think you got like an 80% or something like that on this one. So here we're doing the writing process, and we're pretty much done. You can read the rest of this, the pre-writing and rewriting. So in week 6, we're doing rewriting, of your final draft. So usually the last week in which you proofread and revise your essay. So that's what we're talking about. So we're talking about this last stage. So that's your week 6 forum. And we did this in week 2, we did this in week 4, and now the last stage is the week 6. So that's why we're just talking about that. So that's similar to week 11 when we do the last stage of the second essay. Week 11 will also be a rewriting week before you turn it in week, whatchamacallit. Here you have your week 2, 4, 5, 6. This is essay 1. Essay 2 is going to be 7, 8, and then 11 and 12. Because in week 9 and 10, you're going to be working on persuasive essay. Okay, something. So for your essay 2, comparison contrast essay, remember the numbers 7, 8, 11, 12. Otherwise, but usually by the time we get to week 11, everyone has forgotten they've forgotten what a comparison contrast essay is. So typically, I have to reteach it again. So I don't know why they wrote this. I don't know why they wrote it this way. They should have done a week 6. And then week 9 and 10, and move it up to week 7 and 8, and then keep these. But anyway, that's the way they wrote this classroom. So just got to remember it like that. So week 6 assignment, so this week you have your midterm, and it counts as your midterm, just like week 12 will count as your final exam. And so week 6 and 12. And do you have any questions at all about any of this? Because I will let you read all of this and study all of this on your. Oh, see, you even get more topics. If what was in your week 7 forum is not enough, you also have this to choose from. There's plenty to choose from. I've had students tell me, but do you have more topics than what's on the week 7? That's so boring. Everyone does the same thing. So then I decided, okay, I created this, and everybody became satisfied, because everybody likes. So you always get 1 or 2 students who want to do something different or something like that.
Right.
They want to challenge themselves, or you got people who get easily bored. So and so there you go. So here you got the alternate side by side. That's the 5-paragraph essay. I think the only thing I didn't cover is block method. So if you're going to use the block method, you talk about everything New York in 1 paragraph, talk about everything California in another paragraph, but you got to do it in the right order. Beaches, Mexican food, culture, beaches. And if you're someone who doesn't talk a lot, or you can write short, you can use the block method. But if you're like me, yak, 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 forget it. You need the alternate method. So I tell the yackers in my class, go for the alternate method. And the people who barely speak or say much of anything, you can fit it all into 4 paragraphs. So it all depends on your personality. Different ways of saying block method in different books. Block method, 1 side at a time, side by side, subject by subject. All the same thing. Different textbooks have different ways of saying it. Alternate method is, you can say alternate method, point by point, side by side. Okay? So those are all different ways, and subject by subject. All different ways of saying alternate method, and all different ways of saying block method. So your Langen book will have your Langen book will not call it block and alternate. It uses one of these 2. I can't remember which is which, that your Langen book, but it's all the same thing. And I don't know why all the different books used all these different terminologies. It just makes everyone's, head explode or something. That's why. The reason why the books do it on purpose, they want the students' heads to explode. And you know what? I can actually do that on that text to picture art stuff. I'm going to do that some more. It makes this stuff look more funny. And when I created this, they didn't even have the AI at the time. Otherwise, I would have put exploding heads already in here because it's so much fun. But anyway, so my next instructor session, that means I'm done, will be about transition words, parallel structure, pie structure. We're going to start working on APA. Because the second half of the class focuses more on APA, while the first half of the class focuses on essay structure. So that's it for this. Was there any questions?
No. The final draft is due next week, right?
The final draft is due this coming Sunday.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, the final draft is this Sunday. So that's for going back to how I started, week 6. All you have to do is a week 6 forum, revision techniques, and then the week 6 final draft. That's it.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, so I'll see you next week then, okay?
Thank you.
You're welcome.